Story 1. I used to work as a bus driver for local suburban kindergartens and elementary schools. After almost 15 years, I quit that job and started driving buses in the city where I lived. I loved driving the kids, but as I got older, it became increasingly difficult for me to pretend to smile every day and interact with the energetic and chaotic kids. In town, the bus stop was only a 10-minute walk from my apartment, and passengers mostly just walked in and out. The driving part of the job itself was more stressful though, but I still felt relieved compared to before. Anyway, the city bus company I worked for had buses running 24 hours a day, albeit at night. They only had a few buses, and they ran longer routes. Few drivers worked one of those shifts, so all of us daytime drivers had to work the night shift every other week. It wasn't terrible. Aside from the fact that it disrupted my sleep schedule, there were fewer passengers, the roads were emptier, so it was much more relaxing to work than during the day. This night it was somewhere between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, and no one went outside. I drove along my usual route several times during the hour, and not a single person needed to hitch a ride. I only saw 4 or 5 people even walking outside. I pulled up to the last stop of the route and parked, not to give someone a ride, but just to take a little break before it was busy. I rested my head on the back of the seat and closed my eyes to rest. I tried to stay awake, but soon there was a knock on the door. I opened my eyes, startled by the sudden noise. There was an elderly man standing in the doorway, looking at me. I smiled nervously and awkwardly. Then I opened the door. He stepped inside and checked his bus pass, then walked to the back of the bus and sat down. "There's no one else, so I can drop you off where you need to go," I shouted, turning my head slightly toward the back deck. It was very awkward for a few seconds before I turned back to the front and headed out again. I thought he might have had headphones in his ears or something. So I was going to do things the right way and stop at every bus stop along the route like I was supposed to. Throughout the trip, I kept looking in the mirror and seeing that the man was just sitting in the back and looking ahead. It was strange behavior, but who knows what these people have on their minds at 3 in the morning. I pulled up to every stop on the route and approached the last 2, wondering when this man would get off. After them, he just goes back to where I picked him up. Stopping at the next stop, I parked the bus and looked at the man in the mirror. After a second, he stood up. He started walking down the aisle, but the way he looked at the floor was very unusual. As he got closer, I turned my body around and I could see his face. It was full of anger and rage. I tried to act normal. I turned to face the road again, but the guy stopped right next to me. I turned around and he was staring down at me. "Is everything okay?" The man kept looking, but then he turned away, walked back down the aisle, and sat down. At that moment I knew something was very wrong, and I began to worry. After a moment, I put the bus back in drive mode and headed for the next and final stop. When we arrived, I parked the bus and waited. There was a kind of tension at this point that was hard to describe. I looked ahead at the empty roads and sidewalks. Then a man stood up and walked quickly down the aisle. He came toward me, but this time he pushed me toward a side window and held a gun to my head so I could look him in the eye. He had the same look as before, insane anger and rage. I didn't know why or what he wanted from me, but I was sure he was going to pull the trigger. The man didn't say anything. He only tensed and pressed the gun harder against my head, still looking into my eyes. Then he opened his mouth wide and screamed right in my face, just a painfully loud, angry scream. Then he let go of the gun, stepped back, and walked out. I quickly closed the door and left. I called the police as soon as possible, knowing that his bus pass was in the system. An officer was sent to where I dropped the man off, and one came to where I was to get more information. A couple of days later, they showed me a picture of the man who was listed on the bus pass the stranger was using, but it was a completely different man. I don't know what kind of sick mind this man had or what he wanted from me, but it was the most unusual, disturbing, and creepy encounter I have ever had and probably still will have. Story 2. I was working the night shift at the gas station and saw a man outside who was completely lost and disoriented. I went in his direction to help him. He had a head wound and didn't know where he was. I didn't see any accidents nearby, so I assumed he had fallen or something like that. Normally, on the night shift, we have to stay inside our room behind armored glass when there are customers in the store. I, being the good guy that I am, went to help him and called the police. They came and looked him over. The cops assumed his skull was fractured and took him to the hospital. I went back to work. A few hours later, these same cops stopped for coffee. They told me that the guy had been hit with a baseball bat while trying to break into a little girl's bedroom. They also told me that he was wanted for rape and murder in 2 other states. After that incident, I never left my room area. Story 3. When I was in college, I worked nights as a saleswoman in a drugstore. Absolutely every night a man came in, picked out some nail polish, approached the salesgirl, and offered to give her the polish if she would go with him to his hotel room and let him watch her paint her nails. Management did nothing about it. As far as I know, he continues to come around to this day. Story 4. It was just past 11 p.m. and I was in the back room of our building moving boxes around. It was just a regular hardware store, and I was an overnight stalker there. My other coworker that I usually work with was on vacation, so it was just me for the night. I didn't mind though, because people always expect less from you when you're left alone to do all the work. So if anything didn't get done, it wouldn't really matter. I was working slowly, taking my time with the deliveries that came in during the day needed to be put by the aisles where they belonged. So I was just breaking down the pallets and putting boxes on carts that I would then roll into the main shopping area and stack the boxes from there. Once I had filled a few cards, I grabbed one and pushed it to the aisle on the far left. It was raining, or maybe even storming pretty heavily outside though through the rain. I thought I heard something from the front of the building. I didn't really care, not even crossing my mind for a second that it was anything other than the building making noises. I took a few boxes and started stocking, humming to myself to save me from the boredom. But then again, I thought I heard something. I walked down to the front of the store and looked all the way at the other end where the front door was. There didn't seem to be anything or anyone. I stayed there for a little bit. Again, in no rush to work. And then it happened again. I could have sworn this time that I saw something moving by the front door. And that was where the sounds seemed to come from. Being in my place of work, with all the doors locked, I wasn't really afraid of anything but more, just wanted to make sure nothing strange was going on outside. I went up to the front door and looked out the glass, which I noticed had huge smudges and scratches on them. Nothing was outside, no cars or people, just heavy rain pouring down. I turned and started walking away back to where I was working. It was quiet for a while, maybe a whole hour even. But then the sound came again from the front door. I dropped what I was doing immediately and walked back to the front from across the store. I could for sure make out a figure moving around outside the door. I began walking closer before the figure stopped, stood still for a second, then ran away. I ran up to the door trying to catch a glimpse of the person, but it was too dark and rainy. Looking at the door though, there were definitely more marks on it than there was before. I was confident that this person was trying to break in. I pulled out my phone, still standing by the door, and called the police. The operator said it wouldn't be too long, just a few minutes. I put my phone back in my pocket and waited by the door looking around. The parking lot was still empty, but then I turned my head to look against the building, and on the very side was that same figure. I backed away quickly, worried that he may have seen me. I took several steps back and tried to be quiet. Not even 10 seconds later, the figure appeared right outside the door, while the glass was somewhat foggy and had raindrops all over it. I could tell he was looking at me. He slammed something against the window. It looked like maybe a large rock. Then he hit it again and again, trying to break the glass. I backed away quicker and ran to the back of the store, locking myself in the office through the building. I heard the glass shatter and the alarm by the door go off. I waited in fear, hearing nothing else. A few minutes of silence passed, and I was growing more and more nervous until the police finally showed up. I heard them call out and walk around searching the place before they got to the office, where I identified myself and told them what I knew. The guy wasn't in the store, so I guess after he broke the glass he just laughed. It seems really weird and doesn't make any sense. Part of me even wishes that he had actually stolen something to that. At least know that that was what he was after. But given he didn't do anything after breaking down the door, I don't know what he wanted. And that is what still scares me to this day.